Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of PPC Town Hall. My name is Fred Vallaeys. I'm your host. I'm also co-founder and CEO at Optimizer. And this is a special episode. This is not going to be the full normal length, but it's also something we wanted to do to put some content out there quickly in response to what's happening in the economy and a lot of the questions that that's raising for PPC and digital marketers. Obviously, the questions are broader than that, but we'll bring the perspective that's hopefully useful to you in your business and your jobs. And so one person who immediately came to mind for me was Sam Tomlinson. He writes amazing newsletters, basically. So most of it is through his newsletter. If you don't sign up for that, do sign up. But he tends to take a very economics-driven perspective on everything to do with marketing. So I thought this is the perfect guy to at least share his perspective on what he thinks is happening, what we might do about it. And so let's go have that chat, and hopefully it helps everyone. So thanks for joining. Sam, good to have you on.
Of course. Yeah, thanks. Good to be back. Always love to be on PPC Town Hall.
Yeah. Well, great. So it's been a stressful couple of days here. The markets are obviously a little wonky. The tariffs are all over the place. They seem to be going
Oh
up
yeah.
depending on when you watch this. But what's the latest? What's going on right now?
Well, on April 2nd, President Trump announced a wide-ranging and very sweeping number of tariffs. So I think everyone's more or less caught up on that. And his team used a very interesting formula to calculate that, which is mostly just a trade deficit related formula versus an actual tariff formula. And since then, obviously, that's kicked off the two the largest 2-day sell-off in the United States equity markets in history in terms of total dollars, not percentage, but total dollars. Uh, Somewhere between 6 and 7 trillion went bye-bye. And then things kind of stabilized on Monday a little bit. And then today, China responded with a 34% tariff on US goods, and President Trump responded and implemented already a 50% additional tariff on Chinese goods. So if you're keeping score at home, anything that's being imported from China is now at 104% tariff. So, if you bought an item for $100 from a Chinese manufacturer and it lands here in the United States, you, the importer, would be responsible for paying a $104 tariff to the United States in addition to that $100 for the product. And that comes as a bit of a shock to a lot of people in the e-commerce world, but I think across the entire PPC landscape.
Yeah, and so one thing that was interesting, and I don't maybe want to lead with, is when we think about a tariff, whatever the percentage is, and you think about buying an iPhone for $1,000, it doesn't mean there's 104% tariff or tax on top of what the consumer pays. It's what the importer pays to bring it into the country, right? So if
Mhm.
Apple say pays $600 for that $1,000 iPhone that they're going to sell to you for $1,000, the tariff is on the $600 they bring it in at. So that buffers the impact a little bit, but still, I mean, these are huge numbers we're talking about, and they keep going up. So the net is that things are going to change, but let's talk about what are the potential responses that we're going to see here, and for each of those, let's maybe think a bit about what you might do in marketing.
I think the most obvious response and what we're seeing the most of, if you subscribe to the news, is a lot of countries eager to cut deals with the United States and President Trump in order to preserve access to the market. I think what you're going to see is a lot of, maybe we'll call them secondary or emerging manufacturing economies. Um, this would be Vietnam, India, even Indonesia, etc., right? Mexico, Canada. These are all, they don't produce the capacity that China does, but they are all very willing to come to the table and to cut deals, as we already saw Mexico and Canada already, making deals with the president thus far in his term. So that's probably the initial impact, is probably the most likely. Um, the bigger risk, I think, is an ongoing and escalating trade war with China, which will likely involve all kinds of instruments of economic war, right? You'll see China selling treasuries to essentially weaken the United States economy. You'll see the United States trying to impose additional export controls, and it just gets messy really quick. The United States and China are the two biggest economies in the world, and predicting what happens when they go to war is not a fun exercise.
Right. And one of the big elements of what happens in a trade war is the uncertainty, right? And it's the tit for tat, and there's a back and forth. And so it's sort of, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And if we're running advertising campaigns or an e-commerce store, how do we
Mhm.
price it? How do our competitors react to what's happening? Are they more invested in China than we are? And hence, is it impacting them more? And so, does that mean their prices are going up and that it creates a market opportunity for us? So, there's all of these moving pieces. So, from my perspective, I would say one of the key things right now is make sure you have really solid monitoring systems in place, because that's going to keep your sanity, right? Like, let the things happen the way they happen. We can't really do anything about it ourselves directly, but at least we can know the moment it's impacting us and then respond to that. So that, for me, that's number one, monitoring systems.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's monitoring, but it's also, getting very clear about your value chain, right? Every organization has their own value chain. You understand, how money flows through your organization. So tariffs are loud. They are headlines. They are the big thing right now, but they are not the only thing that goes out the door. So if you think about, an e-commerce brand, right? You might have, for every $100 widget you sell, 30% of that might be the actual widget, and the remaining 70% is a combination of the cost to acquire the customer, the costs of operating your businesses, your profit, your shipping, your insurance, your all that stuff, right? So the best thing I think you can do after you have monitoring and you understand what's going on is to understand where the other dollar, how money is flowing to your organization. Because if you have to lose some of your margin on on the cost of goods, you might be able to make it up on other sides of the equation. And those are, to your point, in your control, at least to some extent. So, some very concrete examples, right? We have some ecom brands who are immediately renegotiating some of their SaaS agreements, which Fred, I'm sure, is a SaaS person you don't really want to hear, but if you're spending $1,000 a month on SaaS widget X, you might be able to negotiate that down to 500. Well, that's $500 that you've just saved, right? If you can renegotiate your shipping rates, you can, potentially try to find additional optimizations in your paid media to drop your CAC. There's all kinds of ways that you can control your margins and use this as an opportunity to either preserve what you currently have while your competitors raise prices, or potentially even get ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. If you sort of liken it back to what happened 5 years ago, it was drama. A lot of people didn't know what was happening. I mean,
Mhm.
nobody knew what was going to happen, but it ended up being a huge
Correct.
opportunity for certain industries. And so this is certainly a moment where, if we think about it the right way, it's going to create opportunities as well, right? You just have to find what they are, and I think it's a bit unknown at this point. But being nimble, um,
Mhm.
and you make a great point. Like, what's always helped me in my career is understanding um, how things work. And you're basically saying, well, as a marketer, you may have always come in and your client told you, here's the ROAS target, but we're not going to share
Yep.
anything about how the business works. Like, that's not helpful, right? Because then you can't help them steer in the right direction and figure out different ways to cut costs and still maintain the ROAS when the cost of the widget goes up. Um,
100%. But I mean, it's
yeah,
also it's worth having those conversations, even if you are an agency or an in-house marketer now, and saying, okay, well, number one, to your point about monitoring, if our competitors are made in China and we're not, that's a message. That's not just an economic point; it's a messaging point, right? You can lean into that. If you are made in China, but your competitors are not, that's a different messaging point. Like, hey, we've deliberately structured this to reduce your costs and make this as affordable as possible. So we're doing X, Y, and Z, right? You've got opportunities, but you need to be able to have those conversations and understand what's going on.
right. And you bring up a great point, which is informing the consumer about why you decided to go one way or another. And we were already seeing this. We see some mattress companies that now say, here is the pre-tariff pricing. You can still lock it in now
Yep.
because we still have the inventory already landed. But the counterpoint to that, like you're saying, is even if you as a company decide you're going to stay with China as your source of or country of origin where everything's made, that
Hmm.
is not necessarily a horrible thing. You may still end up having that be cheaper even after the tariffs than producing it in the United States. So it's
Correct.
about instilling that confidence in the consumer that they're still getting a good deal. So I assume there's going to be a lot more price comparison shopping, but the more that you can lead with sort of what to expect with your customer through the ads,
Mhm.
through the landing page, that's probably going to help.
100%. And the other thing you can always do is, I think a lot of brands, as you go through, like for instance, we've had a lot of e-com brands, and you start to look at, where does money flow? And one of the first places money flows out of the margin tends to be like those 10%, 15%, 20% pop-up offers. Well, you can get rid of that offer. And if you replace it with something that is more difficult to value, maintain that conversion rate or even improve the conversion rate without having to give it away, right? Like Jones Road Beauty is a great example. They have a quiz that they often send people to. There's not a discount per se, but it reduces it, right? For some brands we've done, we'll preserve an acre of rainforest. We'll plant a tree. Do you know how much planting a tree costs like 32 cents?
Mhm.
Does the customer know that? No. They think they're doing something great for the environment that's on brand that supports this. Great, amazing. Love that so much for you. But for the brand, if it's $100 purchase, you went from $10 in margin that just literally went poof out the door to the customer to 32 cents. So you've saved $9.68 in margin with no measurable decrease to your marketing efficacy, your customer acquisition, or anything else. Just because you are willing to look at something and be like, is there a way that I can make this 10% or 12% or 15% not as painful? So, I mean, I'm all about find the
That's all-
opportunities.
that makes total sense. And I mean, I love the idea of standing for something. And if it's about doing good for the environment, um, that's great, right? And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. We've seen great examples too. So you were in Amsterdam for the search,
Hmm.
Friends of Search,
Yep.
and I think you were even judging. But one of the cases that won was KLM because they figured out how to take the emissions data and bake that into their smart bidding algorithm, so that consumers would buy flights that were better for the environment. And guess what?
Yep.
The ROAS for KLM actually went up, so they made more money and they did good for the environment. So it doesn't have to be an either or proposition. So I love that idea because we become so used to everybody offers that 10% for just giving your email
Yep.
address. There's no differentiation in that. So let's shift here a little bit because I think the consumer is also going to start asking questions due to the stock market falling. Like, is this
100%.
even something I need? So differentiate yourself, and that's one way to maybe still pull them over the finish line. But what else do you think is going to happen based on, $6-7 trillion of value being wiped out, which is money that people, it wasn't in their
Right.
pocket, but like I'm thinking about my safety cushion. A lot of that is also gone, right? So I make different decisions. How's that going to impact the different types of sales? You think?
So I think there's a couple of things you have to look at. So there is a very valid point that the vast majority of Americans have very limited or long-term exposure to the stock market. There is truth. It is not completely true that the economy and the stock market are not exactly the same thing, right? You're measuring somewhat different things, but they do have impacts. So if you have a customer that's higher end, that is, you are selling luxury watches or higher end vacations, or even something like Ridge wallets, just to use a very specific and concrete example, that's $100 discretionary item, right? Those are people that are probably going to be feeling it more. So I think you need to sell the value more. You need to build more value. And I mean, fundamentally, the equation of commerce is always the same, right? It's the total value versus the total cost. If the total value is higher, you're going to get more sales. So, one way you can increase value is by including more things, by bundling things up, by personalizing the offers more, by tailoring the offers more, right? It's something that makeup companies have gotten great at that I think a lot more organizations should, which is you take like this 5-question quiz and they're like, here's this custom thing for you that's built just for you with all
Mhm.
of this stuff. That builds a lot of emotional, psychological value. It, we have cognitive biases, it leans into that, but you end up in this position where now somebody looks at this basket of stuff, and it's not a basket of stuff, it's a basket of their stuff based on what they need and what they have, well, that's more value. So when the price, they compare, oh well, this is all for me, and this is based on what I'm going to need to make me feel like my best self. Well, the cost doesn't feel as bad, right? Conversely, if I were to just be like, here, no no lead up, no value building, no explanation, well, now it's just like, well, that's really expensive for face cream because you haven't done the work. So I think you have to build the value and show people how it will make their life better. I think that's one. Number two, it's obviously moving your messaging as much as you can from features, which every brand, every product marketer loves to talk about, to benefits, right? Make your product an indispensable part. Instead of, Apple's classic example is whatever, 100 gigabytes or whatever it was versus 1,000 songs in your pocket, right?
Mhm.
One is the 100 gigabytes is a feature. The 1,000 songs in your pocket is a benefit, and the benefit sells. And I think the third one is emotional connectivity, right? People join people. People want to buy from things that reinforce or showcase who they are and what they believe in, that organizations that share their values to the extent that an organization can share your values, right? So if you do have a brand position, play it up, right? If you're not sure what the emotional connection is or the emotional appeal of your product is, well, now's a really good time to figure that out, because competing on price just got a lot more difficult from a margin perspective. So the next place to go is like, well, what do you stand for? What is your organization about? Put that front and center. And if you can tie all three of these things together, all the better.
Yeah, these are fantastic points. And whatever you stand for, make it real.
Correct.
We saw some great examples where Banana Republic was trying to be the sustainable gene company, and it's like, no, you've bought some
No, that's
keywords
not going to
about
work.
sustainability, but that's not who you are, right? Like people are
Right. No.
not going to buy it. So
But
be real
I think
about it.
every brand can find something that they're all about, right? Like, I mean, Shein should not be a sustainable brand, but I'm sure they could be something like, what, we make great fashion available to everybody. We believe everybody has the right to get things that look great for them or that fit, that make them feel great, or whatever you want to do. And that ties into their affordability message. Amazing. Right. I know there was, oh my God, there's like that sock company that's all about giving back.
Bombas, isn't it
Yeah.
Bombas?
And
Give
yeah,
one pair, buy
Bombas.
one pair, give one pair.
Yeah. Yeah. You buy one
See,
pair, they give
I
away a
do.
pair.
They
See,
stand
you
for
knew that
something, and
one,
it's true, right?
right?
Yeah.
Right, but they are all about paying it forward. They're all about giving back, right? That's a whole thing. Patagonia, obviously all about the outdoors. Harley Davidson, all about made in America. You can
Hmm.
do something like this and you can play it up. But I think as a PPC, or your job in this environment is to think a lot bigger than the ad account.
Right.
And there's always this temptation I keep hearing. Like, I was just on a call with a potential client, and their marketing director was just so about the ad account. And at some point, you're like, dude, you need to take a step back and realize that 80% of the success of your ad account is not in your ad account. It's in everything else that you're doing. And are you making those things work? Are you pulling the biggest levers, or are you pushing the most convenient levers? Because this is the time to pull the big levers, not the little ones.
Right. And another example of that would be a brand that comes in, they don't have free shipping, and they're like, hey, we want to compete on PPC. And like, hey, well, Amazon is there, it's free shipping. They probably have a better
Correct.
price. So, like, what are we going to do for you in PPC? Like, sure, we can get sales, but you're going to lose a
But
lot
it's
because
going to hurt.
your business. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's going to hurt a
Um,
lot.
it is. You're going to have to pay for it. And until you fix those business issues, like
Mhm.
PPC is not the silver bullet here.
No.
Um, Totally agree with everything you're saying. The other thing, stand for something as a brand. Um, I think also you made the example of a face cream and a luxury watch. Like within
Right.
that spectrum, there's this notion that in tough economic times, there's the lipstick indicator, and people want to have small luxuries for themselves, and so
Hmm.
but they're going to gravitate towards the things that are more accessible, where it's like a $20
Correct.
purchase that's more accessible
Versus.
than maybe that $100 or $1,000 purse. So
Hmm.
if you as a brand or as an advertiser you have access to that lower cost product, that could be a good way to get in and eventually build that brand loyalty. That when the economy gets better or more certain, maybe not better, but at
Mhm.
least we know where it's headed, then people will buy those more expensive things again. So that's one thing I think people
Right.
could do.
There's that. I mean, we've got one brand now that's starting out with like some trial kits. They've never done those before, where they're taking a few of their SKUs and putting them together into a lower cost bundle. And the idea is basically get you interested, get you kind of hooked on a few, and then upsell, which is an easier thing to do versus this. Um, Obviously you could go the other way too, and you could do the Fabletics thing where they have a tariff surcharge. If you go into you go to check out, there's like a little tariff surcharge item that they've had on there for a few months. And they
I don't
literally
know
just
about
show
that
you
one.
what the,
What was that?
yeah, they have like a little thing. If you go to check out, it'll show you at the bottom, like whatever the cost of goods are. And then it's like plus tariff surcharge. It's been up for a few months. They're like, we would love to lower your price by this much, but we can't because of the tariffs. I'm like, all right, well, it's
Okay.
one way to be really transparent about it. I mean, I guess their theory is basically to show that this isn't, it's like the utility theory on regulation, where you show the cost of the cable service or the phone service, and you put the little regulatory button at the bottom, and you try to get people mad about it, or so they don't think you're upcharging
Right.
them. Which I mean, you can
Well,
do.
and I think that made sense with phone companies because yes, you get mad, but you have no other
Mhm.
option. Or back in the day, you didn't have
Correct.
another option, right? You pay it anyway, and you complain with your legislators. But when it comes to
Hmm.
Fabletics, sure, now I'm
You've
angry, but
got
I'm
some
also like, hey,
options.
yeah, is Lululemon maybe eating more of that different? Because this is ultimately another thing, right? Like, not the whole cost
Right.
of the tariff has to be passed on to the consumer. And what I'm hearing is, well, Foxconn is going to bear some of that burden, so they're going to lower the wages of the people working in the factory building the iPhone. And then Apple's going to not take a 40% margin. They're going to reduce that. And so, but everything gets split up. And so, from a consumer perspective, that's where it's super interesting because now it's like, well, if I have options, and Fabletics is clearly saying, well, you, the consumer, you're paying it, then I'm going to go somewhere else
Hmm.
because I want you to share that with me. I want
A
you to pay
hundred
part of it.
percent.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, we have some brands that we've been talking to, and one of them is they're taking a pretty big hit on the tariffs, and I mean they're upside down on some stuff that's already on the water, which is kind of a real like I think that's the unintended consequence of this policy is like, for instance, there's a brand that I know of that has several containers on the water. They were launched back in end of March. Um, they'll be landing in port at the end of April, about 45-day period. But the products on those containers are sold. They are pre-purchased at a certain price, and with an additional, there is not an additional 75 points on the COGS and margin on the products. So when those land and they pay the tariff, they will have lost money on every single sale they made.
Well, and they literally don't know what the tariff will be on the day that
That
it
is
arrives.
correct.
So
They have no
they
idea.
might be like, please
They might
throw
be
that
very
container
upside
overboard.
down. Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much, yeah. That's that is the reality. They are better off, potentially refunding the customer versus delivering the product.
Right. And so that's a bit the similarity to the supply chain issues that we saw 5 years ago.
Correct.
Um, and back then it
Yeah.
was also like the shipping containers doubled in price, but it was quite
Yep.
interesting because that meant that for something really large like a dishwasher, and you can only put say 100 dishwashers in a container, while so the extra cost due to shipping was much higher, right? Whereas if you put
Yep.
10,000 light bulbs on that same container, well, you could split the cost between the 10,000 light bulbs, which I mean they're cheaper
A little
product, but
easier.
maybe that was better.
Right.
And now it's a tariff on basically everyone, and so the supply chains are definitely going to react. And
There's all that. And then I mean, the other thing that we're looking at really specifically is like, where can we make our marketing work better? Right? Can we create more moments around this? Can we push, to your point earlier, like the stuff that we already have in warehouse, can we accelerate revenue? Can we cut costs? Can we create new holidays? Like, can we lean on our current customers more? Can we do more email or SMS? Can we improve conversion rates on the site? Because the idea is basically like, not to use like a Moneyball quote, but there is no single point for almost any of our clients where we can make up for instance, on China, 104% on the COGS, which would be effectively for most of those brands anywhere from an additional 25 to an additional 30% of margin. We don't have it. But what we can do is scrape out 20% if we crush everything in. If we can reduce CAC, if we can trim OpEx, if we can chill out customer service costs, if we can do all these things, we can trim out 20%, we can raise prices maybe 5 or 10%, and we can come out at a point where, like you said, it's shared pain, but at the very least, it's not catastrophic.
Yeah. Now you mentioned negotiating with your SaaS vendor. We'll have that talk afterwards. But I'm sure people are coming to you as well and saying, okay, well, listen, we have an agency cost and it's X
Yep.
dollars, and hey, there's Gen AI. Like, could we maybe let go of some of the people working on
Yep.
my accounting? Can you put more tools in place for that? How do you respond to that?
I mean, positively, right? Like we are already proactively doing that for a lot of brands. We're already leveraging more. We're already trying to do as much as we can to keep their costs reasonable because I mean, number one, it's just the right thing to do, right? No matter
Mhm.
if this was happening or not, I would say the right thing to do is to deliver as much value as you possibly can to the client. That's what we're in the business of doing. I mean, I'm a firm believer that if you do right by clients, they'll eventually you'll you'll end up fine, and at the very least, you'll be able to sleep at night. So I'll just do right by clients. It's easier. Um, but right, so there's that 100%.
100%,
Number
yeah.
two, work with them on payment terms, right? The other thing that we haven't touched on that's absolutely crippling is cash. Because all these brands now, to your point, they don't know what the tariffs are. So you need to have more cash on hand than you'd prefer to in order to deal with the fact that you may need to stroke the US customs a much larger check. So if you as a provider can say, hey, look, instead of net 15, I'll give you net 60. Well, that's basically an interest-free loan to them that lets them build up their cash reserves with, I mean, yeah, you're going to float the interest cost, but the interest cost to float that is tantamount to nothing. It's
Compared to the tariffs, yeah, it's nothing.
compared to the tariffs, it's not, but I'm saying compared to losing the revenue as an agency or as a service
Right.
provider, right? The cost of losing that customer is many, many, many thousands of dollars. The costs of floating a $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month thing for an additional 30 days at 4%, 5%, who cares? You're talking about $50 or
Yeah.
$500 a year, but it's not even that, right? It's 500, it's $60. It's nothing. You can help them immensely because now they have an extra 10 grand available in this hypothetical scenario for handling this. You get paid a little bit later, but that's a way you can help them out. Um, the other way is you want to work with them. Reduce fees for a few months. Obviously, my recommendation is always, keep it defined. It's a 3-month reduction of fees for this amount or whatever until the situation blows over. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I mean,
Totally agree. And that's again, it harkens back to what we had 5 years ago, right? Where we had customers
yeah,
highly uncertain times, and we just said, listen, you still need a tool to be efficient, even though you're asking us to potentially cancel. Why don't we give it to you for a couple of months and get through this, and you'll be happy. You'll have saved your business. At,
yeah,
at least the cost for the tool is not one more stressor that you don't
correct,
really should be having to deal with. And it builds a
correct.
lot of goodwill, and it builds the brand. So totally agree with
Right.
you on those things.
Yeah. I mean, I would say my other advice is always just be proactive. Like if I mean, most agencies, right? If you're working with a client, you kind of know when they're getting hit. Like it's a good
Mhm.
thing to just reach out and be like, hey, know you're probably getting hit. Would love to talk about how we can help you, what you need in order to make sure that you can weather this. Like we're here to be a resource to you because then you're controlling the narrative. You're the one that's coming to them versus them coming to
Mhm.
you and saying, hey, we're trying to cancel. And you going back and being like, well, what if we did this? Like you look reactionary versus if you're proactive and you're like, hey, the answer might be we need to do something and that's fine. Then you do.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
at least then you're the one that's controlling the conversation a little bit.
yeah. Yeah, and I like your analytical perspective there and just actually calculating the cost of the interest by extending payment. And it's really sometimes not that much, right? And just like the example of planting a tree, if you
Hmm.
get creative, there's many low cost solutions that position you in a great light that help your customer, that drive value. So that's all we
100%.
can do. So yeah, love it. Thank you for sharing some of that perspective, Sam.
Sure.
Always super useful.
Try.
Where should people connect with you?
I'm on Twitter all the time at Digital Sam I am. You mentioned I do write a newsletter every week. That's um, ddl.media or samtomlinson.me. You can sign up on either one, it goes to the same place. Um,
And
LinkedIn,
all
I
these are
check
in the
once in a
notes.
while.
So
Yeah, perfect. But yeah, would love to talk. I can ever be helpful. Always happy to help.
great. Well, thank you, Sam. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll be back with another episode soon. If you want to get notified, do subscribe. And thanks again. We'll see you on the next one.